Habibur Masum, you may remain seated until I tell you to stand. You have been found guilty of the murder of your wife, Kulsuma Akter. As her brother, Emrah Hussain, and her sister-in-law, Minara Begum, explained in most moving impact statements, the terrible and unimaginable pain of her loss has had a huge impact on her parents, siblings, family, and friends. They have described how the massive loss of Kulsuma has left a deep and painful void, which the family feel on a daily basis. They now face a life sentence of grief with no release date. Kulsuma's son will never know his mother. For the grave offence of murder, there is only one sentence prescribed by law, and that is imprisonment for life. And that is the sentence that I shall impose upon you in due course. However, I am required to determine the minimum period you should serve in prison before you are eligible to be considered for release on parole. To decide the minimum term, I must consider the facts of the case. I must be sure to the criminal standard of the factual basis of my sentence. I've had help from the sentencing notes and oral submissions from both prosecution and defence, for which I am most grateful. I also have to sentence you for 4 other offences: assault by beating, making a threat to kill, stalking involving a fear of violence, and possession of a bladed article. Kulsuma Akter was born on the 2nd of April 1997 and was aged 27 years at the date of her death. You met and married Kulsuma in Bangladesh, and you moved to the UK in the March of 2022, having finished your degree in English literature to do a course of marketing here at the University of Bedfordshire. You travelled on a student visa with Kulsuma accompanying you. Whilst you initially lived in Dunstable, but then moved to Burnley, Kulsuma lived with her brother, Akter, in Oldham and worked at Park's Bakery. When Kulsuma blocked your messages, you went to see her in Oldham on the 4th of August. You'd bought a knife and brought it with you. You went to her workplace, and then when you couldn't find her, you went to the tram station in front of where she was living and stayed there all day waiting for her. When the police found you, you were half conscious. When asked about matters at the hospital, you said that you felt like you would kill her, and that when you fought with her, you felt like you were going to kill her and or yourself. You were advised to go to a GP, which you never did. You had a marriage celebration on the 7th of September 2022 and began to live as husband and wife. On the 23rd of January, in January 2023, Kulsuma fell pregnant. And in July 2023, there was an argument which resulted in Kulsuma leaving the house, as she believed that you had divorced her by screaming, as you described it, talaq 3 times at her. She went to her family and you messaged her and constantly called her, telling her that you were going to do crazy things because she was not with you and was at home. You kept asking her, where was the kitchen knife? Given what you were saying about knives, the family were worried for your safety as well as Kulsuma's and called the police. I now turn to the events of the 23rd and 24th of November 2023, which resulted in counts 3 and 4 on the indictment. Kulsuma was on maternity leave and received a text from a colleague at work asking if she was working. It was your habit to check her phone, and such was your controlling behaviour, she needed to ask for permission before she went to meet anyone, even her own family. The message incensed you and sent your jealousy into overdrive. You threw her phone against a wall and assaulted her. slapping her face while she held your son on her lap. You also held a knife to her throat, stating, "I'm going to murder you, and the police will be taking me. And tell me what your relationship is with him, or I will kill you." Kulsuma then acted very sensibly in calling the police and locking herself in the bathroom when they came. She set out in a statement that she was very frightened. When you were holding the knife, she believed what you were telling her. She told the police that because of how scared the incident had made her, she did not want to stay with you. As a result of what she knew of your behaviour, Kulsuma was able to predict to her sister-in-law, "I will be killed. You may find my dead body someday," and asked her sister-in-law that if you killed her, would she look after your son. You were arrested and detained, and it speaks volumes for your attitude to the law that when given permission by the police to make a phone call, you called your brother and told him to make contact with Kulsuma. Subsequently, you were to ignore bail conditions, not to contact Kulsuma directly. Kulsuma was found a place in a refuge. The state had done what it could to protect her from you. But she made a mistake in posting a message which allowed you to track her location. It is indeed a sad fact that it can be very difficult to entirely protect a woman in a refuge from a determined and cunning man intent on confrontation. Kulsuma settled into the refuge and made some friends, and her family arranged for you to see your son on a couple of occasions, as you not adequately pursued your ability to do so through social services. At this time, neither your professed love for Kulsuma or depression prevented you from being on Tinder to find a date. Next, you threatened the 5 members of Kulsuma's family who live in the UK. You messaged Kulsuma's brother, stating, "If I don't get my family back by the 1st, I will kill everyone." And messaged Kulsuma on Snapchat, stating, "I will kill 5 of them." You then did a daily countdown. As Kulsuma stated to her social worker, Amy Tucker, the threats had made her worried about her family, she was mentally disturbed and distressed. You then travelled from Oldham to Bradford so that you could confront her. In the late evening of the 28th of March, you were captured on CCTV, loitering in the area of the refuge. Next day, the 29th, you sent Kulsuma a Snapchat video of Bradford Interchange railway station with a message saying that you'd come to her town, and 20 minutes later, a video showing the outside of the refuge. You wanted her to know that you had tracked her down. You were cunning enough to use Snapchat so that the messages disappeared after they were read. When Kulsuma reported your messages to social services, they knew that she was no longer safe there, and they arranged for her to move refuge. It is a very sad fact that had she not been tricked out of the refuge by you on the Saturday afternoon, she would have been moved to another refuge on the Monday. Tuesday, the 2nd of April, you were back in Bradford and loitering in the vicinity of the refuge. You then bought a new mobile phone so that Kulsuma would not recognise your number, and made the first of 5 quite convincing messages from GP health centres about vaccinations for your son in attempts to trick her out of the refuge. You also instructed your brother to say that you were at the airport. However, your attempts to get Kulsuma to leave the refuge were unsuccessful, so you checked into a hotel in Bradford overnight. 3rd of April, you were still in Bradford and sent the 3rd, 4th and 5th false medical appointments, but you were still unable to get Kulsuma out of the refuge. On the 4th of April, so the Thursday, you started to make arrangements to go to France by taxi, although you had no visa. You were told that the pickup would be from Birmingham and that the next pickup was on Monday the 8th of April. You said you'd call after fixing the date. I am satisfied so that I am sure that you were planning to get out of the country if you attacked Kulsuma. On Saturday the 6th of April, you came back to Bradford, arriving just after 11:30 a.m. You had a knife with you. You loitered in the area around the refuge for 3.5 hours, waiting for Kulsuma to come out. As she was convinced that you were in Spain, Kulsuma came out of the refuge with a fellow resident, known for the purposes of this case as Jordan Palmer, at 3 o'clock to go to the local bazaar to buy some henna because Eid was approaching. When Kulsuma got to the bazaar, she was met with you coming out. She was shocked to see you because your brother had told her that you were in Spain. It is obvious that Kulsuma then tried to head back to the refuge. You're seen walking with her, and eventually you stop outside a general store. Your interaction with her is caught on CCTV. You move the pram and are seen waving a finger at her. I have no doubt, fearful of you as she was, that she did nothing to provoke or annoy you. At 3:16 p.m, you pulled out a knife from your pocket and attacked her in the full view of passers-by. You stabbed her, deliberately targeting her front, and when she was on the ground, you stamped on her before finally cutting her throat. The footage is very distressing to view. She sustained 26 wounds. One to her neck, a shocking one through her face, an 8-centimetre deep wound to the upper chest, and 12 others. There were also 11 incised wounds. Her injuries include defensive ones to her left hand and left arm, caused as she tried to fend off the knife. The most significant injury was the stab wound to the neck, which cut through the windpipe and jugular vein. The nature and extent of your attack proves beyond all reasonable doubt that you intended to kill her. Jordan Palmer was terrified that you would attack her. And unsurprisingly, given the busy location, the attack was witnessed by members of the public, 6 of whom have given statements that were read to the jury. You calmly walked off after the attack, significantly showing no interest in your son, who on your evidence you were missing so badly, throwing the knife into a nearby car park. Kulsuma was helped by Dr. Suleiman and his wife, who saw a large group on the pavement and Kulsuma on the floor. They tried to do their best, but the reality was that the wounds that you had inflicted were unsurvivable, as was your intention. As attempts were being made to save Kulsuma's life, you were walking to the city centre to catch a bus. You made a 10-minute WhatsApp call to your mother, during which you did 5 things. You made 3 financial transactions, transferring £800 to your brother. You booked an Uber to Birmingham, and then you got on the bus. The CCTV from the bus shows that, to say the least, you were not obviously distressed when you got on and sat down. You then put on your phone into airplane mode so as to avoid being located. I have no doubt that you have a greater memory of the attack and its aftermath than you have told the jury. By the following day, Sunday the 7th, you travelled south to Aylesbury and were caught on CCTV buying new training shoes and a mobile phone, whilst accompanied by another man, you had your hood up to hide your face. You made attempts to avoid being recognised before you could leave the country. You changed your facial appearance, shaving your beard, cutting your hair. You wore a different coat, different trousers, different footwear. You had a problem with your jaw, which had locked on previous occasions, and whilst yawning, it dislocated again. But for this, I have doubts you would have been apprehended before you left the country. You went to Stoke Mandeville to get some emergency treatment, and although you gave a false name, you were eventually arrested in the car park in the early hours of the 9th of April. For the grave offence of murder, there is only one sentence prescribed by law, and that is imprisonment for life. As I've said, I am required to determine the minimum period that you should serve in prison before you're eligible to be considered for release on parole. But it is most important that you and everyone concerned in this case understands what the minimum term means. The minimum term is not a fixed term after which you will be automatically released, but the minimum term that you will spend in custody before your case can be considered by the parole board. It will be the parole board, if you have not been deported, who will say at that time whether or not you have been released. If and when you are released, you will still be the subject of licence, and this will be the case for the rest of your life. If for any reason your licence were to be revoked, you will be recalled to prison to serve your life sentence in custody. In coming to the appropriate minimum term, I must first decide where this case falls within the section of the Act that is relevant and Schedule 21. Here, you took a knife to the scene to have it available to use as a weapon, so the starting point is 25 years. I am sure that you had no thoughts of self-harm on the 6th of April. The knife was bought and taken to the scene with only one use in mind. Every case will be subject to its own specific and individual features of aggravation and mitigation, and in all cases, what must be achieved is a just result. I now turn to the relevant aggravating and mitigating factors. The minimum term will reflect all of your offences, and the other sentences will be concurrent. 2 offences are of prior domestic abuse through violence and threats to kill. As I have said, such was your behaviour that Kulsuma was able to predict her own death at your hands. You stalked Kulsuma when she was still in the refuge, causing her to have a legitimate fear of further violence. I will not double count your behaviour reflected in these offences within the other aggravating factors. Your murder of Kulsuma was the most serious of domestic abuse offences. As set out in the relevant guidelines, such offences are rightly regarded as particularly serious within the criminal justice system because they represent a violation of the trust and security that normally exists between people in an intimate relationship. Kulsuma was your wife and the mother of your son. There was a significant degree of planning and premeditation, with your repeated attempts to trick Kulsuma into leaving the safety of the refuge with a new phone used to send false medical appointments, and also getting your brother to lie about being in Spain. You also made plans to leave the country after the attack. You acted in breach of bail conditions by going to Bradford on the 6th of April, conditions specifically designed to protect Kulsuma. It was a sustained and excessively violent attack, and Kulsuma suffered mentally and physically before her death as she tried to protect herself. The attack was in a busy city centre location on a Saturday afternoon, a shocking event which any of those involved are unlikely ever to forget. You then took careful steps to avoid apprehension before you were arrested, having little option but attend hospital. I turn to mitigation. You had no previous convictions, cautions, warnings or reprimands before these offences were committed. I turn to your mental health. The jury rejected the defence of diminished responsibility. However, if an offender suffered from a mental disorder which, although not substantially impairing the ability to exercise self-control, lowered his or her degree of culpability, that may be a mitigating factor. I've carefully considered whether the depression you were suffering lowered your culpability for the murder. You had moderately severe depression that solely arose from the effects of your own controlling and coercive behaviour and was then aggravated by your criminal behaviour, and in particular when your assault and threats to kill Kulsuma led to her being in a refuge and not with you and under your control. I bear in mind that Dr. Farnham's analysis was to a large degree dependent on information you have given him, which was not true. As the psychiatrists agreed, as distinct from any depression, your personality included a tendency, I'm satisfied, a strong tendency, to be controlling, angry, jealous and possessive. You understood the nature of your conduct and could make rational decisions, but I have considered the extent to which the depression turned up the volume, to use Dr. Farnham's phrase, or the intensity of your personality traits, and impacted on self-control. Whether any effect on your mood, irritability, hopelessness, anger, control of impulse and emotions, or problem-solving played any real part in your actions and affected your culpability. I am satisfied that the contribution of depression to your murder was very limited, so there is only a very limited effect on your culpability. You exaggerated your emotional state during the interviews and the extent to which you were missing your son. You never had any intention of harming yourself. You were able to carefully plan how to engineer an opportunity to confront Kulsuma and try by clever false messages, even a fake Instagram of yourself in Spain, to try and trick her out of the refuge over a number of days, travelling back and forth to Bradford. You bought the knife with one purpose in mind. This was calculating behaviour. You also made arrangements to get out of the country, and your actions after killing Kulsuma were calm and collected. You never lost self-control. Any proper balancing of aggravating and mitigating circumstances requires a substantial uplift from the starting point. Anything other than that would be wholly wrong. I turn to the other offences. Threats to kill. In my judgment, this is category A1 in the relevant guideline, as there was a knife used. It caused serious distress to Kulsuma and had a considerable practical effect as she had to leave her home. Starting point is 4 years custody. It was aggravated by being an offence of domestic abuse, and I would also have reflected the assault offence, for which I would have imposed a concurrent sentence in any event. Stalking. In my judgment, this is on the border between B1 and C1. It was intended to maximise fear and distress. You have, as I said, the mitigation of no previous offences. You've also pleaded guilty to having an article with a blade or point. This was an essential ingredient within the murder offence and reflected within the starting point chosen. I have taken into account the principle of totality when considering the impact of these offences on the minimum term. Credit must be given for time on remand. You'll have spent 467 days in custody for this offence. Associated matters. I direct that if the surcharge applies in this case in respect of any of the offences, it should be drawn up in the appropriate amount. A transcript of the sentencing remarks will be attached to your file for the benefit of the Parole Board. I wish to praise the brave actions of the members of the public involved, and in particular I commend the actions of Dr. Suleiman and his wife, and also the work done of the emergency services and of the police. Everything that could be done was done to try and save Kulsuma's life. I also wish to publicly recognise the work of the West Yorkshire Homicide and Manger Inquiry Team in the apprehension of you before you left the country and in the investigation of the offences, just on one element of which will have been the obtaining and viewing of many hundreds of hours of CCTV. A considerable amount of dedicated work has gone into securing justice for Kulsuma Akter. Stand up. On the 6th of April 2024, you attacked Kulsuma Akter, your wife, in the centre of Bradford on a busy Saturday afternoon, stabbing her to death. You had spent days stalking Kulsuma and trying to trick her out of the safety of the refuge so you could confront her. She was in that refuge because of your violence and threats. Your intention was that if she did not leave and come with you, that you would kill her. After several unsuccessful attempts, you succeeded in getting her to leave by getting your brother to lie to her that you'd gone to Spain. You then had what you were waiting for, the chance to confront her. Within 15 minutes, you had viciously and mercilessly attacked her in the plain view of passers-by. You stabbed her 26 times, including slitting her throat and stamping on her. You then calmly walked off, leaving your son, who you claimed to be missing so much, in his pram. You changed your appearance, travelling to the south, staying with friends, and I have no doubt were ready to flee the country when a visit to the hospital led to your arrest. Having considered the entirety of the evidence, I'm sure that you can be properly described as violent, self-centred, jealous, controlling and coercive, with a firmly held view that your wife was not your equal and should do what you told her to do. You stole a precious young life in a brutal and merciless fashion because of your self-interest and refusal to accept Kulsuma's right to a life free from your violence and controlling behaviour. You have shown no real remorse, only self-pity. For the murder of Kulsuma Akter, I sentence you to life imprisonment. You will serve a minimum of 28 years, less the 467 days you have served on remand. For the offence of making a threat to kill, there will be a concurrent sentence of 4 years. For the offence of stalking involving fear of violence, a concurrent sentence of 18 months. For the offence of assault by beating, a concurrent sentence of 21 days. And for the offence of a possession of a bladed article, there will be no separate penalty. I order the destruction of the exhibits as to be agreed. Take him down.